My name is Jake. The Forever Green program, for each of these crops, we have sort of like these research units. So Jim was talking about the plant breeding and genetics unit. I'm representing the agronomics unit. We have an environmental impacts, ecosystem services team. Jess is going to talk about that. Food science, commercialization. And we work under this umbrella together of the Forever Green initiative. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we're doing from an agronomics perspective with Kernza. So this is the world's first perennial grain crop that's large scale, commercially viable. How do you grow it? How do you grow it profitably? Just a lot of these fundamental questions that we needed to answer right away. What's the row spacing? When do you plant it? How deep do you plant it? When do you harvest it? How much nitrogen? How much phosphorus does it take? These just really fundamental questions. We can look to some other crops to start with some answers, but really it requires a lot of research and experimentation. So out here, this is a field that's planted into a 7.5-inch row spacing. This is a rather narrow row spacing, and that's great for organic production because you can see that it gets pretty thick and it can compete well with the weeds. You could go with a wider row spacing and get similar yields or even sometimes higher yields, but you'd have to be able to control weeds in between the rows. So if you could do some inter-row cultivation, if you have that equipment, that's a possibility. Another thing that we're doing research on is fertility. Nitrogen's the first question. How much nitrogen can this take up? How much does it use? Well, the deep, dense root system that you saw on the poster, that means that this plant can access and find nitrogen in the soil that most annual crops can't. So it can access that nitrogen and use it, which means we don't have to apply as much nitrogen fertilizer. So we see yields maximized in this crop with fertilizer rates that are about half of that used for corn, so maybe 80 pounds per acre. Another thing about the Kernza is that not only does it require less nitrogen, but it uses what you give it more efficiently. So less nitrogen flows through the soil and into the groundwater and drinking water. And that's called nitrate leaching. So there's certain areas of Minnesota where this nitrate leaching is a real problem for municipal drinking water sources. That nitrogen gets into the groundwater. These small towns are getting their drinking water from the groundwater, and it's contaminated with nitrogen, nitrate specifically. Well, Kernza can grab and use this nitrogen really effectively, and it means that we could potentially plant this in these really especially vulnerable areas of Minnesota that have nitrate leaching issues. These are the sandy soils of central Minnesota, the shallow aquifers of southwest Minnesota, the karst geology of southeast Minnesota. That's exactly what we're doing in a lot of our research projects, is planting this in wellhead protection areas and looking at the reductions in nitrate leaching. And the results are really promising. So this is looking like a crop that can really provide that environmental benefit. Another really important piece of the economics of this is the dual use potential. This plant was introduced to the US as a forage crop in the early 1900s, so it has great forage potential. And really, a grower can manage this field to get 4 sources of revenue. One can cut the hay from this field early in the spring before the stems elongate, and that's a source of revenue, a spring forage, or you could be grazed. If you do it at the right time, it'll still grow, produce the seed heads. Grain can be harvested in probably 2 to 3 weeks from now. Then all of this straw can be harvested. And the straw is still pretty green. It still has nutrients in it. And there's a lot of it out here, as you can see. That's another source of revenue, so that's the third. And after that grain harvest and straw harvest, the plant continues to grow, just producing leaves all the way until the snow flies. And that could be harvested or grazed in October. That's a 4th revenue stream. That cycle can continue for multiple years. So if there's an access to forage markets, or you have cattle on farm, this crop is really the way to go. It's low risk that way. I think that's about all I got for agronomics. There's probably lots of questions if you want to talk about seeding rates and all that stuff. Do you have a question?
If you're removing it, like if they grazing, is there a limit to what height you can take it down to, or what, to keep it going?
Yeah, we cut it to there's a few inches, 3-inch stubble height. I haven't seen any issues with like scalping in times that we have gotten pretty low. You'd have to know that if you do push the system and take the cutting in the spring and the fall and remove the straw, you'll see a reduction in grain yields in year 3. Even though we already see it, that reduction gets further reduced because of the removing of the biomass. But it could still fit into a rotation as a 3-year crop.
Good.